Welcome to a presentation on Archline XP, the design software targeted for architects, engineers, interior designers, and furniture makers. What makes our software special is that every single component of your project is stored in one single file. You can create a 3D model, you can create walkarounds, different perspectives, you can create floor plans, sections, elevations, and all kinds of documentation stored in one single file. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you an example workflow during which we are going to build up the building that you see on the image right now. But everything has to start somewhere, and we are going to start with imports. Before we get started building up our little house here, we should talk about the import and export formats, which are the key features of Archline XP. Archline XP is a very open platform, as you can see on this chart. We have many formats which you can use to bring in data from other software packages, or passing on your data to other parties. The most important one we should talk about is the IFC, the BIM file format, with which you can communicate your ideas and projects to other BIM software packages. We should also talk about the Revit or SKP SketchUp file formats. Also important formats are point clouds, Google Earth integration, PDFs, JPEGs, Excel files, and also there's a wide array of files you can export your model into other third-party rendering engines. The file format that we are going to deal with today is the DXF or DWG format. Let's imagine that we have an existing two-dimensional documentation of the building that we just saw, and we want to turn that into a BIM model. Let's see how that works. In this particular case, we have an existing DWG drawing of the entire building, and that's what we are importing with drag and drop, which is, by the way, how most imports work in Archline. When I'm trying to import something like this, I have a preview here in which you can check out the project content. I can toggle between the different scales over here, so I can see if I'm at the right scale. And if I did find it, I can check in the bottom right if the ruler reflects the actual circumstances. So I'm just going to check the exact scale that I need to, and when I'm satisfied with the result, I hit OK to accept this. In a few seconds, the DWG drawing is going to appear on my project. We can see that this is just a solitary two-dimensional line work. But if you have worked with any other CAD software, you know that this comes with layers. Now let's look at the layers. If you have ever worked with a software like this one, you know that everything is stored on layers, and the very special thing about Archline is that every single element is automatically assigned to a certain layer. And you can toggle between layers that are coming with your drawing. So if you open up, we can see that these are the layers that came with the drawing, and I can go back to all the layers in the drawing. So now let's see how we can turn this solitary two-dimensional line work into a three-dimensional model. So let's imagine that I was given this DWG drawing by my architect colleague, and my task is now to turn this into a three-dimensional model. How do I get started? The basic element I'm going to work with are the walls. But if I select this tool, I see a very important tool in Archline, namely the styles. That every single element you create in Archline, let there be composite walls, multi-layers, studwork, brickwork, veneer, anything, can be saved into styles for later use. I'm going to use a very simple, basic one-layered wall, and that's what I'm going to use to turn this into a three-dimensional model. But how do I recognize the lines? I have a purpose-built tool for that. It's called Walls on DWG Drawing. I have to click close to the endpoints and on the opposite side of the wall, and the software is going to recognize the walls. Now, let's see on the 3D what's going on, because I see that every time I do something, it has consequence both in 2D and 3D. Now let's continue. I'm going to work on the main load-bearing walls. I just have to click on close to the endpoints and click on the opposite face, and I see the walls appearing in the 3D as well. I'm not entirely satisfied with the connections, so let's amend that. I can do that in the 3D and the 2D as well. I have to just click on the L connection tool, click on the walls that I want to connect, and the software is going to take care of the rest, extending the walls or shortening them the way they are supposed to look like. Let's go back to the drawing and continue our work with the inner walls and partition walls. I'm going to turn a few more walls into actual three-dimensional walls, clicking on the endpoints and on the opposite face, and I see the model building up nicely. Now this is the time when I have to care about the partition walls as well. But one important thing about them is they are thinner than the rest. I do not need to take care of the thickness. I just have to click on the right points and the software is automatically going to take care of the thickness and the height values. Now let's amend the connections in the 3D again. There you go, a T connection there, another one there, and an L connection over there. And my next task would be to take care of the textures. I don't think there's point in doing all the walls at this point because you are going to get the idea anyway. But one thing I want to show you now is how to set up the right material settings. You can see that the walls have two materials set up, but the inner walls, I want them to have all this kind of whitish surface. So how do I do that? I select one of the existing surfaces, click on Find Material, and when I have the material in the design center, I'm just going to drag it and drop it onto the elements I want to modify. I just click on the elements I want to change, rotate the view, and find the missing elements, and then I'm good to go. The next task is to add the doors and windows. And this is where we are going to go more into BIM territory because we are going to find fully parametric elements. If I go on the door menu, I see that there's a whole list of built-in elements I can use. There's a wide array of internal and external, single or double-winged, even arched elements I can use from my library. One very important thing is that they all have properties I can modify, but more about that later. Actually, windows are the same story, but now I'm going to demonstrate how do I use existing line work to position a door. I use a very similar tool to wall on DWG. It's called Door by 2 Points. All I have to do, I just have to click on the two nodes where I want to position my door and define on the opening direction. A very important thing is happening right now. You see that the door is a little bit offset from the wall. Now I wonder why that is. Remember when I talked about styles? This is a door style which is targeted for main load-bearing walls, not partition walls, and it has a setup called a distance from wall line, which I have to decrease to 0. If I open up the door styles, I see that there are many different styles, including one targeted for partition walls, one for load-bearing walls, so this is where I can set these things up. I'm satisfied with my current one, so I just hit OK. And now I'm just going to track the other points and add a few more doors. Again, door with 2 points, hit the two nodes, define the opening direction, and there you go. Another one there. Now let's talk about windows. They are pretty similar in a sense that you have to hold 2 points and the window would be assigned to it. There would be one additional element or additional value I have to care about, and that is the seal height, but I'm just going to set that up at a later stage. I promised earlier that I was going to set up some compound walls to better reflect my original plan. Now is the time for that. All I have to do, I just have to select the wall and enter the properties and click Edit Compound Wall. Here I see that there's only one solitary layer for this wall. Let's create 4 more. Once I have that, the next thing I have to do, I have to set up the thickness for these layers. The first one is going to be 150 millimeters, and the other one is going to be 60. The third one is 80. And 150 would be the last one. Notice I'm now working in millimeters, but you can change that to anything you want. The second most important thing would be to set up the correct material settings, because they are going to be very important for creating the sections and elevations or even rendered images. The middle 2 layers are going to be thermal insulation, so for that I can find an appropriate content from my material library. And when I'm done with that, the next important thing would be to set up the hatch patterns. The external ones are going to be stripped hatch patterns, so I'm just going to find the one from the library that I need. But the middle 2 should be insulation. And when I find it from the library, yes, let's just set up that one as well. And now when I find the middle 2 layers, I just have to click on thermal insulation. And when I do, I see that the preview in the bottom right is starting to take shape. There's one last thing I have to do before I start to use this content, is to define the function. Now the function is actually going to determine which layers should be connected to which ones. So I have to find a core layer, which for me is going to be the innermost one. I'm ready to use this content now, but remember in the beginning I mentioned layers, and I mentioned styles I mean. Let's see how I can save this wall into a customized style. I open up my style library, I click new, and here I can name my style. It's going to be 405 compound wall, and I can give it a folder, in which case I can find it better later on, and I can decide if I want to make this accessible in all the projects or just in this one. I'm just going to click on the all projects option, and from now on this is going to be part of my library. There is one hardship, one problem at this point. Only one of my walls are changed to the actual circumstances. How do I copy this property to others? I'm going to use the copy properties tool, in which case I can define which properties I want to copy, and I just have to select the walls that I want to copy the properties to. Hit enter, and it's all done. Let's zoom in to see the details. There we go. It is time now to add the slab so as to have some kind of floor under my walls. How do I do that? For this purpose, we are going to use a tool called Slab by Walls. When I selected it, all I have to do, I just have to select all the walls under which I want to create a slab. Hitting enter would create just the slab that I need. This is the automated way. But what happens if I want to create an additional customized element, maybe a terrace like that, which extends from the windows all the way to the parking lot? So how do I do that? I go back to slab and click on slab with a sketch, and all I have to do, I have to click on the nodes that I want to work with. And this is a very, very familiar CAD tool. What I do, I create a path and I hit enter, and then the element is created. What happens if I want to modify it, or I want to create another copy of it? It's very simple. I'm just going to hit Ctrl C, pick a drop point, Ctrl V, and I can paste the element. But one problem I face right now is that my terrace is not going to reach the parking lot. So what do? I click on the contour and I hit offset, which is another very, very familiar CAD tool, and I extend it all the way to the right place. So that's how I create customized elements using polylines. Next task is to create a staircase. So what is the story with staircases? These are again another example for parametric building design. Let's see what I mean by that. If I click on stair, I see that I can choose from a palette of pre-designed or predefined staircase shapes. I have U-shaped, L-shaped, straight runners, and that's what I'm going to use right now, one single straight run. I click on it and I define the starting point, which is going to be over there. And now I'm going to drag my mouse to the endpoint, but I see that the staircase is now pushed to the other side of the wall. How do I amend that? I click on this flip tool, and then the staircase is going to be put to the other side of the reference line. I click on the ending point, and I have one staircase. Let's look at the 3D and see how this looks like in 3D. One problem with it is that it doesn't really reach the second floor. How do I make that happen? I selected their properties, and this is the time that we talk about the intelligent staircase modeler. Because here I see that I have all kinds of values, including the height, the steps, and risers. First of all, I'm going to enable to take into consideration the floor height. There you go, and I see red values appearing. Now these values are showing that based on the current setups, the staircase, although can be created, would not be ergonomic. This is something that we can ignore, or we can take it as an advice. But at this point, I'm just going to keep it as it is. Maybe change the width, but I think I'm just going to accept it as it is. There we go. That's how we create a staircase, which we can later on modify at will. Let's just stop here and ask, how did the staircase know how high it should reach? How did it know the floor height? In Archline XP, in every single project you work with comes with a floor manager. Even if we don't see it, we already have 4 floors created. Currently we are working on the ground floor. And here there are predefined values, which in this case is 3 meters, and that is the value that the staircase took into consideration. If I want to override this, then obviously everything else is going to comply with the changes. So at this point, I think it's time to talk about how do we create a multi-story building. And for that, I'm going to load up another version of this project when I have every single wall and opening figured out for the ground floor only, and we are going to look at how we can duplicate the floors to create a high-riser. As you can see, I loaded up the final version of the ground floor. Let me recap what we missed here. We have a few extra partition walls, we have the openings, doors and windows figured out, and we have the texture set up to the appropriate manner. My task is now to create additional floors and copy what I see here to additional floors. Before I actually do that, I don't think that we need the DWG drawing anymore. So how do we turn off the drawing that we have imported? We don't want to delete it because we might need it later on, but let's just go to the layer manager, and there I can select all the layers that are coming with the imported DWG. And here I can select with Ctrl A all the layers, disable them, hit OK. And now I see on the 2D that all the unnecessary parts are now temporarily disabled. My next task is to create additional copies of this floor. What do? I select the whole ground floor, and I'm just going to copy these elements one floor up using the floor manager over here. Using this button, I'm going to copy everything one floor up. There we go. Don't forget that now the first floor is an exact carbon copy of the ground floor, which is not good enough because I see that there's no gap between the floors. So the slab that I copied upwards is to be having some kind of gap so that I can get from one floor to the other. I can do this manually, however, this is a perfect time to introduce another automated tool, which is the cutting of the slab above the staircase. If I select the staircase, in the local menu I have a tool called cut the slab above the stair, and that leaves us with an automated hole that the software is creating. Notice that I can manually fine-tune this hole if I want to, but I'm satisfied with the result. Next thing I have to figure out is the balconies, because even though I copied the elements one floor up, I'm not satisfied with the shape. I see the dashed line over there. My task is to adjust the balconies so that they would line up with these lines. But what actually happens if I want to edit things on different floors? Since all the floors look the same, how do I tell where I am? Luckily, I have a marker over there which shows the actual floor that I'm occupying at the moment, and I can jump between the floors using the floor manager or the page up, page down keys. It's very hard to tell the floors apart, so if I modify the balconies on one of the floors, it would be easier to tell them apart. So let's go to the first floor, select the balcony, and I'm just going to use the well-known CAD tools to modify the nodes and neatly line up with the CAD drawing, just like that. There we go. And now I'm going to navigate between the floors again so that I can show you what the differences are between the floors. See, that's how I can jump between floor to floor. So let's see what the other things are that I have to adjust on the newly created first floor. For instance, that dividing wall between the slabs, I don't really need that, so I have to select it and I just hit delete and I get rid of it like that. Next task is I have to create the balconies railing, and I do that with a purpose-built railing tool. If I click on this tool, again I see the very familiar styles on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, and there I can find the exact style that I'm looking for. I'm looking for one with glass panels. I think that one would be good. And now I just have to track the outlay like that. Again, I just have to create polylines, and for that the software is going to assign the 3D models. Let's see if the railing actually lines up properly. Let's zoom in and see if it's good enough. Now I see that I have to manually fine-tune its height values, its base elevation. So what I do, I have to select the whole balcony, the railing, and use the markers in the 3D. And this is where it becomes very interesting, because in Archline you can modify things in 2D and 3D to the same effect. So if I just want to visually grab onto things and position them, I can do that in the 3D just as much as I can do it in the 2D. Now I'm just going to copy this railing in the 2D to the other balcony. I just have to select it, hit Ctrl C, find a common ground over here. I think that edge would be good enough. and hitting Ctrl V, I can paste it. I am not entirely satisfied with the material settings. I'm not satisfied with what came with the style, so how do I change that? I can go to my design center, to materials, and I can just find the proper glass surfaces. I want to find something grayish or bluish, but something which is transparent. Just find the one that you're looking for, drag, drop, and click on replacing one material with the other, and if you do that, both instances would be automatically changed. Now the next thing would be is to look at what makes a railing, because this is actually a very interesting illustration of what Archline is able to do. Remember in the beginning we created a polyline, and along this polyline this railing was created. But if I go into the settings, I see that the railing is actually made up of vertical and horizontal elements. It's made of objects, it's made of glass panels, it's made of profiles that are extruded along a path. So this means that you can create additional customized elements. If I go to the style list, I see many other styles which are created, and we urge our customers and our clients to use these styles and create additional ones so that regional versions can be created. Now it's time to create additional elements, additional floors. We already know how to create additional copies of these floors. I'm just going to select the drawing and the parts which I'm interested in and copy them to the additional floors. So all the first floor is now selected, and I'm just going to copy them to additional floors. Here's one copy, and I want to make another one, create to the third floor, and there we go. Let's take a look in the 3D and see how it looks like. Obviously, now you would need to take care of the differences between the floors, but luckily this building is pretty repetitive, so I don't have to care about these things that much. Let's proceed. So now that we are done with the main building, it's time to position the roof. And for that, we are going to use the roof tool, which works a bit similar to how the staircase tool works, because you can find and use existing styles. So this means that if you want to create a flat roof or an open gable or a Dutch gable, you can pick it from here and you don't have to create it yourself. But for now, for this example, I'm going to use the auto roof, which works this way. I have to pick a rectangle and sketch a rectangle over the whole building, just like that, from one point to the other, extend all the way, click, and the basic roof shape is created. And now in this property tab, it's time for me to decide how I want to show my roof. If I want to go with a very simplistic view, or if I want to pick a style which is more complex. So if you want to work with rafters, battens, and other elements, then you should find and use a style which fits that purpose. But for now, I'm going to go with a very simple one-layer conceptual roof style. My next task is to decide how this style should look like, what the texture should be. And that's what I'm defining right now. I'm going to find a very grayish color for the underlay, hit update, and I see my roof is now reflecting the changes. Next up is to define the roof tiles, and for that I'm going to go with a very grayish texture. If I zoom in, I can see it better. I see that the ridge is not good enough, so I'm just going to go to the ridge tab, find a grayish material, and there you go. The textures are now all figured out. Next, I have to set up the geometry, so I go to the general properties, and first I have to decide where I want this roof to be positioned. I have several options over in this graph. I'm going to use the A value, which is the distance between the floor and the purlin. So what I have to add is the 0.8 value, or 800 millimeters if I'm working in millimeters, and I'm going to hit update for this in order to position the roof just the way I want it. Next, I have to define the overhangs, which is going to be 450. Now that these values are set up, let's talk about the roof planes, because we know that this is going to be a gable-ended roof, so I have to go to pitch and shape, and I have to just simply click on the side that I want to turn into a gable end, hit update, and then the roof shape is going to distort accordingly. So now I have a very simple shape that I want to create, and next thing I have to modify the pitch for the remaining two sides, which I do by clicking on the side, click that the changes should apply for both planes, and define the value, hit update, and then I see that the inclination is now changed. If I'm satisfied with my work, I hit OK, and the roof is going to be positioned. But I see one major issue here, namely that the walls are not cut by the roof. Let's now see how that can be done. Going back to the same property tab, I have to go to projections and cut, and here I can set up the rules based on which the walls and slabs are going to be cut. I'm going to say that the roof should cut all the walls and all the slabs no matter where they are. And I hit OK, and nothing happened yet, and this is the time where I have to use the 3D hammer. Generally, in Archline, everything happens in 2D and 3D at the same time. In certain cases, when it might take too much processing power, you have the control over what and how you want to build up. Now that the roof is done, I see that I still have a balcony that I have to figure out. How do I add a hole to a roof plane? I have to click on the roof, and I have to go to the local menu and click on hole. And this would allow me to create a whole sort of recess in the roof. All I have to do, I have to create another rectangle, find the right nodes, click to the right angles. There we go. And this way, if I click, the hole is going to be created. But there's another issue on the other side of the roof where I need to have a recess instead of a hole. So how do I create that? I have to click on the roof's edge, click on the Insert Node tool, and I have to break up the roof plane to smaller segments so that I can manually and individually edit them. Click on the Insert Node, and when I'm done, I have to click on the edge and offset it back all the way. Yes, let's now turn on the other side to see what we have done. For a reason, the wall is now cut, because that's the last thing I asked the roof to do. So how do I undo this cut? I don't have to undo it, I just have to rebuild the 3D, because now the software, recognizing that there's no roof above the wall, it is going to rebuild the elements all the way up to their original values, just like that. My next task is to add a few roof windows. If I go to the 2D, I see that I have their spaces over there. This data came from the DWG, remember? And now I have to add the roof windows over here. I do that by clicking on the roof and going to the local menu where I can click the Place on Roof Plane and Place a Roof Window tool. Now, this is where I actually set up how my roof window should look like. First of all, I have to define the style of the roof window. I'm satisfied with what is selected, but the sizes are not good. So I have to manually override the sizes. The width would be 780 millimeters and the height would be 1400. Now, the seal height is another interesting thing, which is something I would have to figure out for the roofs or for other windows, but in this case, it's not really needed, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to freely position the roof window. Notice how the roof window is now tied to the roof's edge, but if I go to free position, I can just put it wherever I want. If I zoom in on the 3D, I see the result of my work. Another topic which is also tied to a roof is how do we create a rain gutter? For that, we have a purpose-built tool again. We go to the roof gutter tool, and I just have to click on the plane where I want the gutter to position. I need to modify the vertical and horizontal offsets so that the gutter is going to be positioned accordingly. And it's worth talking about what makes the gutter look the way it is. It's actually the section profile. For now, it's a U-shape what is set up, but you can find another profile from the library, or you can create your own. At this point, I'm going to use the U-shape. Next thing I have to add is the downspout. Where the downspout is going to be positioned is governed by this slider, or by the values you type in under the position tab. I know that the downspout should be 0.5 meter from the left hand side. I hit enter, and I have to add the length, which should be 12 meters or 12,000 millimeters. I'm satisfied with the other values, I accept it, and again, we should talk about that the downspout is governed by its profile that we can add and modify. Now let's look at how it looks like in 3D. Imagine that there's something you want to adjust in this. You can do that just fine. Notice the nodes in the 3D, just like with almost everything else in Archline, you can modify things in 2D and 3D as well. I have now loaded up a final stage of this project. when I have this building duplicated, and I have another few neighboring buildings at a very early conceptual stage, along with some objects to make the environment a little bit more interesting. Now, when you want to create walkthroughs or rendered images, it's important to somehow signify the neighboring buildings, but you don't want to spend too much time with that, so it's important to know how you can make conceptual models. Let's see that empty lot over there. I want to create a building volume, something that gives the concept of weight, but something I don't want to spend too much time on. So what I do, I go to the terrain, building volume tool, and I just have to sketch the main contour of the building that I want to create. Hit enter, and here I have the option to set up how my building volume should look like. I'm going to define the E value, which is the total height. That is going to be, let's say, 25 meters. And now the rest of the values are going to be governing if I want to have a roof or anything. So I'm just going to give a B value, which is the facade's height minus the roof. And the last value I have to define is the A, the pitch of the roof. For this, I'm going to add the value. There we go. Hit update, and then I have this nice broken roof plane. If I hit OK, my building is going to be now positioned. If I'm not satisfied with the position of this volume, I can rotate it. And if I want this building to have the exact same texture as the others, what do? I have already did this before, but it's a quick refresher. I right click, find material, and I'm just going to drag and drop the texture onto the newly created element. And there we go. One of the reasons why I created the environment is I want to get realistic shadows, and for that I also need to define the project's location, which I can do in the File, BIM menu, Project Parameters, and there I can add the project location based on GPS coordinates, existing city list, or any other details. But I'm going to use a different tool for that. I'm going to go to the bottom where I have a north sign assigned. Here I can define where the project north is, and this is also and always in relation to the floor plan that I see on the right hand side. I'm just going to hit OK. Now that I have the north and the project location defined, I can work with the shadows. I go to View and go to Shadow Simulation, which allows me that based on my current settings, this is how the shadows should turn out and look like at any given time of the day. And this is something that would automatically turn on and off the shadows of the software. This is something that we haven't turned off yet, but at this point I can go back and turn on the shadows again, just like that. So I am done with the modeling, and I have figured out the geolocation in the north direction. Next thing I have to do, I have to start documenting the model, which is a very important topic in Archline. One of the reasons why we built up the model as a 3D model is that because I can get documentation with just a few clicks. Let's give a first example with dimensions, for which we have a very own toolset, which would automatically measure everything. I'm going to go with the All Walls tool, and here I can set up the rules, what and how I want to dimension. I am not satisfied with the current rules, so I'm just going to delete all the criteria, and I'm going to set up my very own. The first thing I want to measure and dimension is the door and window frame. Next, I'm going to dimension the wall endpoints and the overall measurements. Now, don't forget that the order of these dimensions are going to be shown on the dimensions. I'm going to return to that in a second. So I'm just going to hit OK. And all I have to do, I have to select the parts that I want to dimension, hit enter, and define and offset how far I want the dimensions to locate from my project. And notice how we set up the rules, and that is actually the order. In closest to the model, I have the measurements and dimensions, which I have set up the first. Now I see the nice dimension lines, but the question is, how are they in connection with my model? Because they are in association, and that is very important, which means that if I have any change in my model, let's say it turns out that I have to move this window just a little bit, then the dimension is going to comply with the changes. So you don't have to manually update these things. They are going to be always in connection with the model. Next, I have to position a text, which is going to say pavement. I'm going to go to drafting text, and I'm just typing in the value what I want. Pavement is going to be the word. Hit OK, position the text. Everything is done in a one-to-one scale. You shouldn't scale things up or down. That's something that the software figures out on its own. If I want to manually change the sizes, of course I can do that. My next task is to get some more understanding of the rooms and areas and the surface values. Luckily in Archline there's an automated tool for that under the Room and Area tool. It's called Room by Walls. I just have to click inside the room, and now the software tells me that the surface area is this and that, and it gives a name and consignation for the room. If I want to change the name, I can do that by clicking on the pencil icon, and here I have an understanding of all the norms and rules, limits, calculated areas, and general properties of this location. If I want, I can set these up. I'm only interested in the room's name. If I want to project and show some other values, volumes, I can enable and disable them here. I'm just going to hit OK, and now this text is renamed. If I want to rename some other, I can do that in the property tab on the left hand side as well. But these were the automated things. What happens if I want to manually track a location? Maybe there's a split room or split row between rooms, or maybe I have a balcony or a terrace I want to track. With this tool I cannot do it because there are no walls which are enclosing this area. Room by polygon, however, would help me. Again, this is a good example of things in Archline that can be done in an automated way, or in certain cases with a manual tool, depending on which one suits your purposes. Now I have another room here which I need to rename to terrace. And this is how we do this. Notice how the values would update anytime a wall or any element would be moved. It's time to create our first section. Let's see how we do that. So one advantage of building up a 3D model like this one is that I can make sections and elevations anytime I want, and they are going to be in connection with my drawing. But let's see how that works. When I generate a section, I can set up the section properties. First thing I have to figure out is the crop region. This means how deep I'm going to see from my section. Next thing, I have to enable that I want to have a partial section, so I don't want to have the whole project being cut, but only the part that I am interested in. I have to enable the hatches on section, obviously, and I want to hide the objects because I don't need all the benches and all the street lamps, because at this point I don't need to see them. Hitting OK enables me to draw a section line, which I'm doing right now. Let's just click, and now I'm defining the viewing direction, which direction I'm looking at the section line from. I'm just going to create the section, and in a few seconds the software is going to come up with a section of this very drawing that I just created. Let's see what we have just generated. Seemingly it looks like a line drawing. If I zoom in, I see hatches, I have lines, I have all kinds of polylines and vectorial drawings. However, if I click on any of the drawing elements, let's say I want to click on a door, I see that the door is simultaneously selected on my section and on my floor plan as well. This means that this is not really a line drawing after all. This is just a representation of the drawing. Now, what this means is that anytime you have a change in your floor plan, in fact, I'm going to make a change right now. I'm going to move the door a little bit to the side. Then the section is going to comply with the changes, just like that. So if I zoom in on the section, I see that the doors now, although they don't line up, they show us perfectly what happens if you make a change on your floor plan. The section is going to comply with the changes. I can make manual copies of this drawing if I want to detail them further, but at this point I'm satisfied with the link between the floor plan and the section. Now let's see how the elevations differ. This is where I'm going to use the project navigator, which is going to collect all the data, all the things that you have created in your work, and this is where you can create the elevations as well. There are 4 predefined elevations, and just clicking on the South Elevation tab, it is going to give you the elevations just the way you have done it with the sections. But something is wrong. I can't really see my building because there's another building volume which is hiding what I see. I wonder why that is. Let's go closer and investigate. I see that the elevation marker is not at the right place, but luckily you can move them and position them to another place. So I can just move it closer to the drawing. The reason I'm showing this to you is just to illustrate that even the section and elevation lines, they can be modified. You can add the breaks, you can offset them, you can extend them, or you can shorten them. And if you do it properly, then the section and elevation is going to update, and this time we are going to see the right content. So treat the section and elevation lines as the generators of viewports, so that way you can define where you want to see the model from and what exactly you want to see. If I click on any of the elements over here, I see that they are still in link with the model, and if I have too many things on my drawing, I can just reorganize all the tabs with a very simple button, which is going to reorganize my workspace, and now everything is organized correctly and conveniently. Let's move on with how to create a floor plan and how to put the floor plans on plot layouts. So now it is time to document this whole drawing, and we do that with the plot layouts. I go to documentation, plot layout, and prepare one. I have to first decide the paper size, which is going to be a standard A3, and I have to decide on the orientation, which is going to be a landscape for now. I might have a plot stamp as well, or title box as if it's also called, but I'm not going to have one. I'm just going to prepare an empty sheet so I have enough space for my content. And how do I get the content over here? I go to the project navigator, and I'm going to drag and drop the first floor, the ground floor, onto the whole drawing in a 1:100 scale. Now here's the problem. My project is amazingly huge, so there's too much stuff going on over here. I don't want to have the whole content over here. It's not going to fit my page. What do? I'm going to offset my drawing and ignore everything what I don't actually need. I'm just going to click on the sides, because you see this is not really a drawing. This is more like a view through which I see the original project content. I just click on offset and ignore everything that I don't actually need. You might have additional cutouts in this shape. This is going to be now just a very plain rectangular cutout. Okay, what happens if I want to have a section just posted next to this drawing? I go back to the project navigator, and there I can just grab onto the section and position it in a 1:200 scale. Nicely appears, and again, this is still in connection with the drawing. What happens if I want to have just a very simple wall connection, just a part of the drawing? I don't want to do the whole cutting again. I want to just have a very manual decision on what I want to import. And I want to import that balcony over there. I want to make a rectangular selection, and I do that with the plot layout, copy part to plot layout tool, and I'm just going to do a selection, decide on the grabbing points based on which it's going to be pasted. I select the plot layout, and I'm going to paste it just as it is in a 1:50 scale. There you go. Notice that a plot layout is not the part to make dimensions. This is something that you would do in the original 1:1 scale, because now things are scaled down, which means that if I want to add additional text, I need to scale them down them as well. If I select any of the elements, right click, I can refresh if anything changed on my floor plan. Now is the time to print our work. So we go to the documentation, print to PDF tool. And here I have to define how I want to position my drawing. One problem right off the bat is that I don't have the right paper size. I have to go with A3. And it's going to be a landscape. Now another problem is that the scale factor is 1:100, but if you remember, we have already scaled down our drawing, so I have to go with 1:1. We go with what to print, entire drawing, and we have to center the drawing to the plot. There we go. I can manually fine-tune if I want to organize a drawing or move it to add any of the sides, but I'm satisfied with the result now. I just have to define the file name. Clicking on this tab, I can name my file, which is going to be BIM&Visual. And I'm going to hit save. And if I click on print, my plot is going to be realized. So everything I created up until this point is now pushed into a PDF. In our software, it is possible to create a multi-page PDF. That's something what I haven't done now, but I can give you an example of how the drawing should look like when you have multiple pages. Basically, all the project content with all the buildings are now pushed into one multi-page PDF. Don't forget that this project originally came from Germany, so that's why I have the German plot layout and the German title boxes and texts, but this is the idea. This is how you can get all the documentation parts with all the groups, 3D and 2D elements neatly published in one single multi-page long PDF. This actually concludes the graphical part of documentation, but what happens with the consignations and quantity takeoffs? Let's go back to the software and see what we can do in terms of calculations. I have to go to documentation and quantity takeoff. And here I can generate an Excel list based on my criteria. I'm going to go with the building calculation, and I have to now set up what I want to include in my calculation. I'm going to include every single element. I'm going to hit OK. And based on my choice, there is going to be an Excel list generated with all the building parts. Here I have to name my consignation. I'm going to name it BIM&Visual. Hit save. And if I have Excel installed on my computer, then this file is going to automatically open up. So if I have Excel installed on my computer, then this file is going to open up automatically. And I can browse between the different tabs where I not only see the components listed one by one, but I can see the general numbers and calculations. Every single building element is going to be listed in this very static Excel output. What happens if I need to have something which is more in connection with the model? What happens if I want to refresh this list? There's another tool for that, and that is called the schedule. Schedules are actually pretty similar to quantity takeoffs, but there's one major advantage. They are going to be updating anytime there's a change in the project. Let's see how it works. I'm going to place a schedule, and it's going to be a door schedule. Hitting OK would allow me to place it. I'm just going to say that I only want to have the current first floor to be encompassed in the schedule. Hitting OK allows me to place this table of text. But if I highlight this table, I see that there's something going on here. Not only can I override values over here, I can find the original ones where these numbers are referring to. So for instance, I see that the door over there belongs to this schedule part. If I go to the schedule, I see that there are numbers I can override. So if I say that this is actually a wider door, I hit enter, I see that the value not only updates in the text, but it also updates on the actual floor plan. So this way there's a bi-directional effect between the floor plan and the project content and the schedules. This way you can create content which is going to be always in connection with your model, but you can also unlink this and save it into an Excel sheet. This next scenario I'm about to show you is one of the new features of the upcoming Archline XP 2020 version, and it's called creating a lighting plan. As you see in this room, I have a couple of lamps, ceiling lamps, 3 of them, and 2 wall lamps. You see that these are not only objects, these are actually light sources. And I have a few switches over here and there, and I also have a LED strip somewhere there. Now, my task is to connect these switches with the lamps, but I want to do it in a very intelligent and fast way. Before I get started, I need to talk about the 2D symbols. This is something that you can set up. I'm currently using the European ones, but if you have local symbols, you can change the representation to anything you want. Now, the task is to connect the switches to the lamps, and that's what we are going to do now. I need to know what is connected and what is not connected yet. Luckily, I can check that. I can check the status of the lamps. I see that all of them are blue now. That means that none of them are connected. And I can check the status of the switches. They are blue as well. It means that they have nothing to connect to. So now it's time to connect them. If I select any of the elements, I have 2 opportunities to connect additional elements to these switches. I'm just going to click on draw, and then I just have to hit the element I want to connect. I can select additional elements if I want to create a serial connection. Now let's go back to the switch and look at the other way. I see that now there's a red plus, meaning that one of the ways is now occupied, but the other one is still green, with which I can connect 2 additional wall lamps. If I go back and select the status of the switches, I see that this switch is now red, which means that both of its ways are now taken by these 5 lamps altogether. Now, I'm not really satisfied with how the wiring should look like, because that's an automated placement, but luckily I can change these lines. I can change the contour, I can arc them, and I can change the colors if I need that for my purposes. So I just select the lines, give it another line color, and there we go. Let us see another example with the other switch on the left-hand side. If I select it, I see I only have one single opportunity to connect this to anything else. I click on draw, and now I'm connecting the LED strip. Again, I'm not entirely satisfied with how the connection turns out by its automated ways, but that's fine. I can manually fine-tune this. There we go. One huge advantage of this method is that they are going to be intelligent connections. Let me illustrate what I mean by that. I already have a room and area stamp over here. It's called living room, and I have the main properties, the surface value. If I select the correct tool from the lighting plan, I have this tool available called room built-in power, and if I select the room stamp, I see the current electricity consumption and the current wattage. So that way I can keep track of how my electricity plan and lighting plan is taking shape. So for instance, if I want to modify the environmental factor, if it's actually a residential area or an industrial one, if I want to create or modify the illumination or any other property, then this is where I can do that. So these are going to be intelligent calculations in living connection with my work. Eventually I walk away with a piece of text which is showing the currently suggested wattage based on the properties that I have set up. This is how this should look like, and that's the amount of wattage that I would need to reach. Another great new tool in the upcoming Archline XP 2020 is what we call MEP, namely mechanical, electrical, and pipeline editing tools. In this very basic example, we want to connect an external and an internal components of an air conditioning system. We have to create a pipeline, but we are going to do some automated editing in order to make our job easier, faster, and, not less important, more accurate. So how do we connect the two? First, let's select the internal element. We see that we are working with a manufactural item, which means that we know the exact dimensions and exact properties of this element, including where the pipes are coming in and out. That applies to the external element as well. Let's select that one as well and see that we have 3 nodes to which we can connect additional fittings. And now we are going to connect the internal AC unit with the external one. We select the unit and we say that from number 3 we want to connect the element with a pipeline. The internal walls would have the pipes in them, but outside they are just going to be visible. So we are going to start creating the route up until to this point, where the software is going to give the bends and the edges, the elbows automatically. But I don't want to do all this job manually. I want to connect the 2 points. How do I do that in a very easy and accurate way? I use auto routing, with which I just have to select the element to which I want to connect, hit OK, and the software does the rest. Let's move closer to investigate the connections. I think I'm satisfied with the result, but there's a very nice isolated view with which I can see my job. So if I go to the visual representations, I only want to see the map values with the rest of the drawing with a very clean outlay. And this is how I can use automated elements to make my job easier and faster. Let's see a bit more industrial solution. How do we link up heating and ventilation units? We have this heating unit over there, and I have a few ventilation ducts on the ceiling. I need to link them up, and for this I'm going to use automated tools as well. So first of all, I need to make sure that the heating unit is tied into some kind of piping and duct system. So that's what I'm doing right now. I need to create a vertical duct like that. So I'm going to use the 2D editing environments to create a ductwork. When it's created, I need to check if it's actually in the right position. I can manually, horizontally move it if it's not. Now, my next task is to actually link the heater into this duct, and I do that by adding the ductwork, and I need to add the T and L connections. I'm going to add a T over there. I'm going to position it just roughly, and when I do that, I see in the 3D that this red fitting just appeared, and now I need to connect the fitting with the heater just the same way as I did before with the air conditioning unit. I need to click on a transition because now I know that the sizes of the pipes and ducts are different, so I need to add some kind of transition between them, which I'm going to do right now. Adding the right values, I can add the transition just fine. And now I'm going to use auto routing to connect this transition with the T. If I go closer in the 3D, I see the result of my work. The software is going to take care of the vertical and horizontal parts and bends and elbows automatically. Now the heater is connected into the main ductwork, but now the ductwork needs to be connected to the ventilation units. And that's what I'm doing now with the use of some more T's. I just need to put it on the duct, and then I can position it. First, I'm just going to position it roughly, and then when I move it, I can align it with the exact insertion point. There you go. And let's add another one. Again, positioning it roughly, and then I can just move it to the exact position. Adding this ventilation unit into the system is going to be done in the 2D. I select the ventilation, add the transition. I'm just going to place it down, add a preliminary route, and now I'm using auto routing again. And let's look at it from a close angle in the 3D. I see a nice connection. Once I created all the endings and all the connections to these fittings, then the last thing I need to do, I need to cap off my duct. So that's what I'm doing right now. Clicking on the duct, I can just add the ending cap. And that's something you can do on the other end as well. Make sure that we finish the job. And actually that is how we create simple HVAC systems using the MEP tools of Archline XP 2020.